Now we have an injury. I have a motion to approve the agenda. So, Watson, Medina. Discussion of the agenda. All those in favor? Opposed? The agenda is approved. Motion to approve the minutes of January 27th. Dykema Gossett. Discussion of the minutes. All those in favor? Opposed? Minutes are approved. Let's see. No unfinished business, I guess. Yeah, it's well. Okay. I guess we'll start with the Dykema update.
Yeah, I can. Sorry, this is Andrea. I can go ahead and start with the state update, and then I'll pass things over to Andy for the federal update. Just a few things real quick. Obviously, busy week last week, a lot of focus around kind of completing work before the Friday deadline, the 21st, on the Earned Sick Time Act, and some changes to that. I know we sent information over to the city with kind of the substitute, the new draft that was taken up late in the night on Thursday. The governor ended up signing the bill the legislature passed on Friday. So that's been a huge focus just because of the deadline. There were changes there to that act as it was ordered to take effect by the Supreme Court. But it feels like now with that behind the legislature, it certainly was taking a lot of the oxygen out of the room. And so kind of some space now to shift focus, and that will quickly turn to budget work as we're expecting this week. A lot of initial committee hearings on the appropriations side, but we also have, and a little strange this year, and I know we've talked about that, the governor's State of the State address on Wednesday. A little atypical coming after the budget presentation. But that will be occurring. I know our team has a briefing with the governor's office in advance, and we'll share details there, any insights. I don't think a lot of surprises because we've seen most of that reflected in the governor's budget, but we'll still be providing updates. But we're also seeing a lot of committees, policy committees starting to get underway now as well. A lot of those organizational committee meetings, but some of those really touch on areas of priorities. And I know we'll hopefully be finalizing the council policy agenda and that for the city, but a lot of those touching on areas of priority, including around funding for roads and things adjacent, road adjacent, other related infrastructure, a lot of discussion on that starting this week, and a number of other issues as well. So kind of getting into that point, the timing, I think, is really valuable with the committee finalizing the work on the agenda. The timing is really aligning well with some of the delays we've seen on the legislative front because of paid sick leave and minimum wage and the focus there. So happy to answer any questions, but that's kind of where we're at right now. And otherwise, I will, if there aren't any questions, can hand it over to Andy Buchik.
Does anyone have questions about anything going on at the state level that we want to raise here right now?
Not particularly. I'll be up there next week for State of the State. It'll be interesting to hear what it entails.
Indeed, yes.
Sorry if I can real quick on Wednesday's State of the State. I believe everyone's received an invitation, but just a reminder, Dykema is hosting a luncheon that runs from 11 to 12:30. There are, at this point, I think credentials all had to be secured, but there are the legislative reception taking place, and that's kind of a joint now event with House and Senate leadership in Heritage Hall in the late afternoon, and then Dykema will be hosting a watch party once those receptions conclude and legislators start moving to the House chambers for the State of the State. We'll resume a reception in our offices to watch the event. So all are welcome. Just let me know if you hadn't already RSVP'd.
Looking forward to it. Okay. Anything? Do you have something? No. Okay. All right. Yeah, let's kick it over to Andy.
All right. Well, I hope you didn't save all your questions for the federal side, because I don't have all those answers just yet. A few things here. I just want to start. Probably the most pressing issue is around appropriations. The current continuing resolution funds the government through March 14th. If you do a quick look at the calendar, you will see that that date is quickly approaching, and we don't have an agreement yet. It's a little bit of a different disagreement this time around than what it typically is. Normally, both sides have a number, and they want to try to get the final agreement to be as close to their number for overall spending as possible. This time, that's part of the equation, but the bigger part of the equation that's causing the impasse is Democrats want some assurance that the administration will actually follow the appropriations bills and not just ignore the parts of it that they don't like, which has seemed to have happened so far. And they haven't found a way to actually provide any of those assurances. And as a result, Democrats have not really agreed to support any of these spending bills or agreements that would at least allow them to draft spending bills. And so we're kind of at an impasse right now. If you were asking me, I would tell you there is a very good chance of a government shutdown on March 14th as a result. That just looking at this from a political standpoint, the Trump administration gets a lot of the things they've been trying to do with a government shutdown. It would freeze all government funding if there is no bill and the government is shut down. You can't push out grants. You can't push out loans. You can't do any of that stuff during a government shutdown anyway. So that would be one way for them to get around a court ruling. They've been firing people left and right. And so a government shutdown sends most of those people home because they can't come to work. And the executive branch determines who is essential and who is not in a government shutdown. So they can essentially handpick the employees they want to come to work during a shutdown period. So my opinion is that the climate is such that, and frankly, before I say that, Democrats feel like they get a little political advantage out of a shutdown too, because in their minds, it makes Republicans look dysfunctional. So the climate is such that there seems to be a little bit of motivation on both sides of the political spectrum for a shutdown, more so than there is to solve this. And so I would, not a given, but I would not be surprised if we see a shutdown, and it could go on for a little while because there's not an obvious endpoint if there is one. It sounds crazy to say this, but even though we are like weeks away from a government shutdown because of FY25 funding, congressional offices are just starting to take requests for the FY26 process, which is sort of like my kids asking for like birthday presents the day after Christmas. Like we haven't even got through one yet, and we're already moving on to the next. And that's kind of where we're at here. And so Mrs. Dingell has not started taking requests just yet. Senator Slotkin has not started taking requests just yet. But Senator Peters made his link live at the end of last week. And as you probably recall, we do have a request pending currently in the FY25 bills for $1 million for the Ann Arbor train station, mostly for planning and design. And so that is still pending. The guidance from Senator Peters' office is not to resubmit last year's projects just yet, that they are still cautiously optimistic that whenever we actually get to the appropriations process, that the FY25 projects will get funded. And if they don't, then they will revisit the request from FY25 and probably ask for an updated submission. And haven't said that they guarantee they'll resubmit them, but it would seem as though they will try to resubmit the FY25 projects, especially the ones that made it into the bill and are just caught in this limbo. So that's sort of the appropriations process. Don't confuse that with what you will hear a lot in the news this week of the budget reconciliation process, which is the framework that Republicans can use to enact tax reform, some of their immigration and energy priorities and things like that. The important thing about that process is it is protected from a filibuster in the Senate. So it only needs 51 votes in the Senate. And so if you get unanimous Republican support for things, you can pass stuff without Democratic support for once. It's a little bit easier said than done because there's lots of disagreement on the Republican side over how to proceed with this. The Senate is sort of following one path, the House a different one, and at some point they will have to reconcile them. And frankly, there's no given that the House will actually get their version through this week. They only have a 1-vote margin, so we'll see what happens there. And this is just the first step of a 2-step process. This step essentially establishes the framework and sort of lays out the overall budget numbers. But the next step is sort of the meat on the bones of that, where it would tell you sort of what the tax policy is going to be to comply with those instructions, where spending cuts might take place to comply with those instructions. Social Security is off the table in budget reconciliation, but most everything else is fair game for folks to use in terms of offsets for different things. And so it's very early in that process, but we'll see where it goes. The driving force behind budget reconciliation is that all of the personal side of the tax code from the 2017 Tax Cut and Jobs Act expires on December 31. And so if they don't enact new tax law by December 31, everybody's personal rate will go back up to where it was prior to the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act signed into law. So I don't think Republicans want to be on the hook for tax increases for everyone. So there is some motivation on their part to reach an agreement and get this done. I mentioned the jobs cut part of this earlier. I know that federal jobs being cut doesn't only affect Washington, D.C., that there are lots of federal employees in Ann Arbor, especially EPA-related employees, and EPA is sort of likely taking some of the bigger cuts, so you will probably see that impacted here. There's lots of legal battles over who can and can't be terminated. At this point, it seems as though most of the terminations have been for probationary employees because they don't have the same civil service protections that others do. And you can be probationary for a host of reasons. You could be newly hired, you could be transferred, you could have gotten promoted. There are a whole host of ways that you could be probationary. It often impacts like military spouses who relocate when the spouse gets transferred in the military. So they often almost always end up being in probationary status for long periods of time. So it's worth watching. And obviously it's created lots of anxiety here in DC with lots of different people losing their jobs, afraid they're going to lose their jobs. And so lots of stress there, lots of legal challenges there. And then just quickly, the last thing I would say is that March 4th, President Trump is scheduled to give his address to the joint session of Congress. They don't call it a State of the Union the year you get sworn in and inaugurated, but essentially it will look just like a State of the Union. And so it'll be him addressing a joint session of Congress for the first time. And I suspect that will be a spectacle.
I suspect you are correct.
Happy to try to answer any questions you might have.
Okay.
I have a couple, Andy. The first being, I guess I appreciate Senator Peters' office having some optimism that things might get through through budget negotiations. Do you have an honest assessment or feel on the likelihood of rail projects moving through? I know the Republicans seem to kind of be going to war with rail in California, and I don't know if that's limited to California high-speed rail or if it's something that we can expect to be a trend in, train station rail projects throughout the country.
I think this one will rise or fall on the larger appropriations issue rather than being targeted specifically. The funding is for a redesign of the train station that is there and updating it, making it bigger. And if you read through any of the literature that we submitted, we talk about how Ann Arbor has the highest passenger volume in the state, and the station hasn't been updated in a while. And so I think that we can insulate ourselves from maybe some of the criticisms around high-speed rail. And the high-speed rail issue, frankly, is a very California-specific issue where there's lots of debate over whether funding has been spent efficiently, dollars have been wasted, and that type of thing. So I think we would be protected from like a specific rail target. We are in jeopardy as a result of just the larger process breaking down. And if, for instance, if they were to implement some type of year-long continuing resolution, that would almost certainly not include congressional projects, and therefore we'd fall out of the bill and it would have to start over again for FY26. I think that's the biggest threat to the rail project.
Thanks. And then this might be kind of too hyper-local of a question for this, and maybe it's something we need to dig into separately, but I guess I wonder with staffing cuts, and you specifically mentioned EPA, and neither of my Ward 5 colleagues are here, but I think maybe we need to also start paying attention about like impact on the EPA involvement in Gelman and continuing to push and advocate for that as this moves forward, simply because if it's going to have a ripple effect throughout everything, we don't want to also continue to see kind of like them back away from that in any capacity.
Kind of following up on that, I think there was a point made in our administration committee about how some of the cancellations and federal funding and grant funding as well are affecting members of the community, like residents employed here that are either employed by the federal government or their research work or any other work is paid for by grant money. And I think there was maybe kind of a request for the administration, that the city administration put together maybe some numbers around what federal grants are in jeopardy. But I was wondering if there's something Dykema could help us with in terms of the broader impact of like federal funds on the community through, I guess, like employment. I don't know, it's a big question, but.
So here, we've tracked this issue really closely, and this is where it's been really difficult, is that the president's initial executive order, so there were two things. There was the executive orders that froze funding for the Inflation Reduction Act and the Investment, Infrastructure, and Jobs Act that were climate related. That was never fully defined. Like the executive order refers to the Green New Deal, which is not a law, it's maybe a concept. So like you can't really connect all those dots. But what it has had an effect on is that federal agencies on their own have essentially paused a lot of those programs because the federal employees are fearful that if they were to push out funding for programs that the administration would deem contrary to the president's executive order, that those individuals could get in trouble and potentially terminated for violating the executive order. So it has essentially like a, sort of a threatening kind of almost intimidation like impact on it, where, people have been hesitant to do that, even though under the executive order, they might not be technically prohibited from doing so. So that's one side of the equation. And the other side of the equation is similarly, there was a memo that was pushed out by OMB on January 27th that said that all federal funding and grants and loans was going to be frozen effective like 5 p.m. on the 28th. And then after huge backlash in 24 hours, they sent out a second memo that rescinded the first one and said, okay, we're not going to do that. But it had the similar effect in that it kind of, had this chilling effect of federal agencies and federal officials and program managers afraid to push out grant funding or loan programs out of fear that someone would hold it against them later on down the line and use it as sort of justification for termination. So again, even though that memo got rescinded, we've seen a lot of interruptions in the flow of federal funding, even though there isn't a specific memo or executive order that would block it. And so there's been a lot of ad hoc type things where like a portal will be open on Tuesday and closed on Wednesday and open again on Thursday. And so I would struggle to give you like a list of those types of things. What has been happening in reverse is that congressional offices have said to me on multiple occasions, if you hear from any clients or any constituents that they are having trouble either drawing down money that was awarded to them or something has gotten blocked, that they want to know about it, and that essentially they are making a list of those kinds of programs. So I don't mean to sort of pass the buck here, but if there are programs that the city or, you know, constituents within the city have brought to your attention where they have been unable to draw down dollars, or their program manager has gone radio silent or something along those lines, any of that information that you could share, I know that Mrs. Dingle would be interested in it. I was in a meeting about a week and a half ago with the group from SEMCOG where Senator Slotkin said she is making a list. And so that's really where those things stand. It's been a really fluid situation, and each agency is handling it somewhat different.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, and maybe that's something, you know, council members on their own too, like with our platforms, can communicate out to the community, saying, let us know, and then we'll pass it on to our representatives. So
it's had a really chilling impact on things related to DEI as well, in that any type of program, and again, the executive orders are written in a way that the definition is kind of in the eye of the beholder. And therefore, a lot of federal officials have been hesitant to do anything that they fear could fall underneath that umbrella and get them into trouble, even though, you know, a lot of those programs predate many of like the DEI initiatives or many of the, you know, IRA programs or anything like that. So we've seen it in like carbon reduction programs where like they pause funding. Like the carbon reduction program has been in place for many, many years, but people were fearful that that would be characterized as a climate change program and they'd get in trouble. Just an example, but we've seen lots of those kinds of examples over the last couple of weeks. And then they get unfrozen and money starts flowing again, but.
Andy, we do have a few grants that are just stuck, that nobody has said no to, but they've canceled. I'm thinking of one with the DOE related to geothermal. But they just cancel calls, like there's just no movement. So there's not a flat no, but it's just stuck. And what I can do is I can work with the administration to compile a list of city grants that there's been no movement on. And
that would be helpful. And it would be helpful to designate whether they've been sort of what stage they are, whether it's a pending application, whether you were trying to finalize the contract terms, or whether you did have a contract but aren't able to draw down the money. Because I think what's based on lots of different conversations, a lot of what is happening is that this pause was to give federal agencies a chance to review every grant application and essentially make a determination, hey, all the I's aren't dotted and T's aren't crossed on this contract, so we could claw this back. Like, we're not locked in by this contract, but this one is signed, sealed, and delivered, and we are locked into that one, so we can't do anything about it. And so a lot of what this pause is likely being used for is those internal reviews for contracts. So knowing what stage any funds flowing to the city or organizations in the city are at is helpful to know, because it will likely change sort of what the recourse is and what like the next steps would be.
Yeah, most of these are with our Office of Sustainability and Innovations. And when the executive order first came out, my office worked with them to create a list of the current status, but it's been a couple of weeks and things move fast, so I'll update the list. And
that would be great. Like, we've heard lots of issues with like the green retrofit program where it's just kind of caught in limbo, and people that had sort of gotten notice of award but didn't get further along in the process have described it sort of how you did, where like it was just, there was nobody there anymore.
Yeah, okay, will do. Okay. Any other questions for Andy? On the EPA, last week we did try checking the status of the gentleman whose name I'm blanking on, who was assigned to our issue. And I think as of last week, his status showed still employed, but I don't know.
I just pulled it up too because I thought maybe we should check, but I don't have it up still.
Okay.
And they've been moving people like EPA, for instance. I know they fired a whole bunch of people out of Region 5, and then they brought a handful of them back because there was no one there to do anything, and they needed to bring more people back. But there's been a lot of fluidity into who's been let go, who's been brought back, who's still in threat of being let go. So it is definitely, I'd say that is like one of the most high anxiety issues driving in Washington, D.C., because there are so many federal employees around here, and then it translates to contractors and everything else. So it's a very fluid situation, unfortunately.
You might say it's chaos.
You might.
Mm.
That's a nice way, actually, to say it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dick and the team. Moving on to the final policy agenda. Did everyone get a chance to get over? I think it accurately reflects the conversation that we had with our legislative delegation. I think there are certainly some things in here still that we know are not likely to be taken up, and that's okay. I think that there's a lot in here that focuses on things that we can work on with our legislative delegation and our lobbying teams. I have a few just little minor edits that I'm going to send over, but just like text. Yeah, exactly. But I think that we should be able to vote on it today. Does anyone have feedback? Any thoughts or any comments?
I think it's great. I agree. I think it reflects the conversation we had. I also appreciate that they kind of give some latitude to the Dykema team to be able to keep their eyes peeled for things and let us know about stuff that falls into buckets. So, like, you know, rather than the laundry list of bills, like, it's quite clear that under standing up for human rights and civil rights and things like that, that we're going to oppose the new Republican effort to ban gay marriage, right? Like those types of things. And so those are, I think it provides that that added flexibility for, you know, now that we aren't as sure what the agenda might be coming out of the House, provides our team with a little bit of flexibility to just keep us informed. They know what our values are, and can keep us informed as there's legislation that comes up that we may want to oppose or support.
You know, I'll say 3 pages, you know, grateful to the staff for helping put it together because, 3 pages is a lot more digestible.
Yeah.
I think it'll be good also, you know, forward facing to the communities.
Yeah. It's 3 very meaty pages. So good. Okay. Well, I'll entertain a motion to approve this so we can pass it along to the council. Regina Gossett, all those in favor? Opposed? It is approved. Okay. Does anyone have any information / upcoming business? Anything from our city attorney?
Well, there was a House rule that was passed in the House that they will not entertain state enhancement grants from cities that identify as sanctuary cities, which is not a legally defined term, that we are welcoming tourism. Andrea and I had a call with the city administrator and interim deputy city administrator, and I don't think we're going to apply for any state enhancement grant, or at least none were identified. So I have to table that issue from a legal claims perspective. So. Okay. If we change our mind and we want to apply for some grants, and You want me to look at innovative ways of bringing things?
And on that point, I just want to clarify that rule, House rule restriction only applies to enhancement grants, not other state grants or state funding. It is that very narrow category.
Have we applied for recently? I think we had applied one for the election center.
Oh, that was an enhancement grant.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Just one thing on the federal level on that, and again, who knows how the enforcement of this will be, but there has been a lot of discussion about blocking federal funding to any cities who are considered sanctuary cities. And so certainly worth watching in terms of that. And again, the designation is a little fuzzy in terms of how you are defined as a sanctuary city. So it's one thing to not cooperate necessarily with ICE, it's another thing to vocalize that and establish that your city is a sanctuary city officially. And so I don't understand exactly how they're going to differentiate, but it is something to watch when it relates to federal funding.
Is there anything like floating around in terms of other municipalities or even like Michigan Municipal League or something challenging this House rule? Because it's, I don't know, it seems like a specific thing to be able to point to any issue you don't like and say all municipalities can't be eligible. And then as a House rule, it's a little difficult from a legal standpoint as well. So if it becomes a new tool used by the House, it's probably a bad precedent. So is there anything floating around from broader groups of communities talking about this?
Not that I'm aware of from MML. I haven't seen anything.
I mean, one could imagine the Democrats, when they get back in power, doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Sort of that, yeah. Interesting road to go down.
Anyone that doesn't have a DEI policy, no grants for you.
This is a slight change of subject, but also thanks to the Dykema Lansing team. I was able to, I had a conversation with the new Republican chair of Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I want to make sure you were all aware that Dykema was able to set up a meeting. I mentioned I'll be up for State of the State, but Administrator Honey will also be coming up, and the chair of Transportation and Infrastructure is going to meet with us. And so hopefully establishing a bit of a relationship there so that, you know, we can maybe have some of these relationships with committee chairs that might have a bit of our fate in their hands, but so they were willing to take that, and so we'll keep you informed. Yeah, they organized it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, were there any questions? Jen, did you have a question on that?
I think, yeah, I was just wondering when that's happening. I'm going to be up there too. So
it's on morning, I think it's 10 a.m.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me in on that. That'd be great.
Absolutely.
Okay. Great. Anything else? Okay. We now come to public comment. Do we have any attendees? We have one attendee. If you would like to speak at public comment, please press *9. Okay. Seeing no one for public comment is closed. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Regina, Watson. All those in favor? Opposed? We are adjourned.